Okay, so a lot of things to talk about here, and this is likely going to be a very long review, but don't you worry, I'm going to be adding out some timestamps for you guys, and there's also going to be a lot of spoilers included here, especially on the story segment, and maybe little in the gameplay, so skip those segments in case you're worried, or just come back later after you play the game. Now, I should probably allude to my two previous FF16 videos. The one was kind of analyzing the trailer and game design, and then later on, we obviously reviewed the demo. A lot of the things I said in those two videos turned out to be like 95% true. All the analysis and predictions that I did, like there not being any mini games, the combat being too easy, the world exploration, all those things basically came to be true. The only thing I was wrong about was not expecting a bunny hopping in the game, which was included. So that was wrong about that. Now, one of the things I was positively surprised about from my previous initial impressions was the Eikon fights, because initially I said, this is not something I care about or find very interesting, but it turned out to be like probably one of the highlights of this game for me, something that I truly enjoyed. So that was perhaps the biggest positive surprise that I got throughout my playthrough on FF16 throughout this week. Now, there has also been this big discussion revolving around FF16, whatever it is an actual Final Fantasy game. But I believe this question or a premise is faulty to begin with. We should rather ask, is this an RPG game? Because we can acknowledge that Final Fantasy games have changed throughout time. They have changed their combat, they have changed from 2D to 3D, they have changed many different aspects. They have ditched out mana and then they have brought it back again. So there has been always this sort of a constant change ever since they transitioned to 3D, and they have been experimenting a lot in that axiom of what is Final Fantasy essentially. But certain elements have always persisted, like great story and things like that, or not maybe so recently, I guess. Fundamentally, like to me it's more important, is it still an RPG game or am I buying to something very, very different? And I'm not saying that not being turn-based combat is not a valid criticism, but to me, like, that wouldn't have changed my fundamental opinion about this game if it was turn-based. So I think like when we look at like 15, which was a very drastic change, and so was 10, they still persisted a lot of like these fundamental RPG elements in them. They had a fair amount of customization, visual and non-visual, through the equipments and talent trees and all that type of stuff. But 16 is really a big departure from that, and I really believe it's really on the borderline. Can it be considered an RPG? Games like Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, which are the main influence of this game, are not exactly considered RPGs. They are not RPG games. They have some RPG elements in them, but they are not RPG games. But fundamentally, like, we have departed so much in this title from those RPG elements. Now, also, kind of like, just to kind of mention a lot of the things that are not here, like RPG elements, like there are no airships, party members cannot die, Clive is the only controllable character, no mana, no minigames, no status ailments, no white magic, no inns, no day and night systems, basically. There's like a very low amount of customization. Also, the talent tree that they introduced in this game is like fundamentally the most limited one that we have seen in a mainline game. It's like really you can't do anything here. Like there are levels obviously and there's attributes, but they're not able to like have much impact on them altogether. Like there's no items that are going to be increasing your vitality or strength. Like the stats are like absolutely meaningless in the grand scheme of things. So just to kind of like put an end to that note, yeah, it's not really an RPG game. So that's something you should probably think about before buying this game and, you know, what you should be expecting from it. Now that my opening dialogue is out of the way, we can talk about the gameplay and the combat system, which are almost synonymous with each other due to the fact that there isn't really much else to do in Final Fantasy XVI outside from the combat. Like Creative Business Unit 3 decided to put all of their eggs into a one basket, which is the combat. Everything is built around the combat, even the crafting system and the shops basically. They are all directly tied into the combat. There are no Chocobo racings, there are no mini games, there's no platforming in the game, there are no puzzles, and there's barely any like worthwhile exploration either. Like yes, you have these open space areas and you can travel with a Chocobo or by foot, but it's not very exciting. Like, yeah, you can go kill enemies there and there, and you can sometimes find chests, but the chests always have shit items like crafting stuff or gil, something that you can get by just killing monsters. So there's never like really valuable items locked, and they are always in so easy places that they're like easy to find. It doesn't give you that feeling that I'm like exploring something here. It's just like, oh, there's a chest, I'm gonna pick it up, and that's it. And you're not even able to talk to the NPCs in the game, so that's not like very much of interaction in the world when you go to a town. There's one shopkeeper you can talk to, and then there might be an actual quest giver which you can talk to, and that's it. And most of the quests are literally go into this location and kill this monster, or deliver this message to another person. Those are 99% of the quests inside the game. There's nothing like out of the box interesting which would like change the gameplay mechanics from the actual base combat that they have basically built it around this game. So that's basically what I'm trying to say to you, that the gameplay is really revolving around the combat, and if you don't like the combat, you're not likely going to have very much of a great experience with this game unless you are enjoying the story. Now let's get into the actual combat system, which is like a much more improved version of like what we had on 15. I mean, it's like less about jumping and warping around and a lot more balanced in the sense that it's not like having these loopholes and abuses that you can do. Like, yeah, there are no mana systems, so you're able to spam out abilities like the fire and other like cast spells which you unlock as you get a different icon. This is like not doing a lot of damage, but you can just circle around the map, spam dodge and spam shooting button. It's very inefficient way to kill things, but it's still like something you can exploit in the game, and so like an effective strategy to win. And it's a very mechanical in a lot of ways in terms of that if you dodge, you get to do like counter attacks and things like that. So you can basically dodge every ability that enemies are doing, meaning that it's kind of like Dark Souls in that sense. So technically you could be like level 10 and beat the last boss, and just by pure mechanics. But obviously it's going to be a bit harder because you take more damage from every ability and etc. The combat revolves around the Eikon forms. You're able to have 3 equipped at one time. There's 8 in total, and all of them have 4 different abilities, and one like it's not a passive ability, but one ability which you can basically spam around, which doesn't have a cooldown. And you can have 6 Eikon abilities equipped at one time, and these are learned through the ability tree. And I have to say that the ability tree is the worst. It is the worst of all time in the Final Fantasy franchise, excluding spin-offs, and even those might have better ones, because this one doesn't have any progression on it in the sense that you're learning the abilities and that's it. And abilities have, you unlock them and then you pay points to basically upgrade them, which give them another effect or reduces their cooldown or something like that. And the third one basically allows you to install the Eikons to another Eikon that you might be using. So you're able to change out the loadouts. And there's not like, even when you upgrade them like to the level 3, their damage output of those abilities are not going up. So it's very like annoying because you can get into a stage where you already have your final 6 ability build up in the mid game. You have your final build already done, which you're going to be running, and you will not be requiring any of those ability points afterwards because there's nothing you can unlock. There are no passive abilities like strength, attack, damage, armor. None of these can be improved to the actual skill tree. There's like a lot of those things I would love to see, like health boost or another accessory or improving an item or like a lot of things. It's like very boring. And also like, because the game is like a lore based, like you will be unlocking these Eikon stances as you kind of, well, beat the Eikons in the lore. So you're not unlocking these on a level basis. As you progress throughout the story, more of these skill trees you're like unlocking. And in the very beginning of the game, you are stuck with the Phoenix set and also with Garuda. Those are the first 2 you're going to be stuck with. And for a very long time, actually. And it's like, Garuda is kind of shit tier in my opinion. I think it's really one of the weakest icons in the whole game. You are like stuck with these abilities, like a lot of options. Like there's a clear tier list which are better and which one are good. There are a couple of options you can go for. I wouldn't go far as to say everything is like absolutely useful. And because it uses a staggering system similar to what we had in Final Fantasy XIII, it takes actually quite long to kill out certain enemies. And that's kind of like gave me a lot of these FF13 flashbacks because it was really annoying that Some of the enemies just like have million health, and I'm like, do I really need to drop like 5 different highest level Eikon abilities on these until these guys fucking die? Even though I'm like doing all the counters, I'm all doing all the backstabs and blah blah blah, I'm still like not dealing enough damage. Even though I have the best items that I can gather at this point in the game, and I'm like 8 levels higher than this enemy, and still like it takes a long time to actually grind out the enemies, and that's kind of like one of the flaws of the combat. Luckily, the potion systems and the tonics are kind of limited. You're not able to just buy 99 potions. This limit is improved by completing a certain side quest line, which will improve your capacity of the potions you can carry, how many of them you can carry. A lot of the balancing really revolves around like how well you dodge. Less damage you obviously take, less potions you have to use. The combat is nice, it's well done, but it's monotone. It's like, it's very long game because we're not playing with other characters. We're not just playing with Joshua or Torgal or Jill. We are playing Clive 24/7, and it's just like you're spamming the same abilities over and over again, and it's getting very redundant because in Final Fantasy VII Remake, at least we could like swap out from Tifa to Barret, and all of them have different skills, and their gameplay, their play style are different. Everything about, even though there are different icons, they play out the same way. It's still like most of them are close combat. Everything uses obviously Clive's sword. There are no like one that is like heavily reliant on spamming ranged. I guess we could say Bahamut is a bit like that, but like fundamentally like every Eikon works out the same way. Odin has a bit of a different mechanic. That was actually fun, but it's the last one you unlock, which is very late on the game, like literally before the last dungeon or so. So that was kind of lame. On the flip side, you get to unlock all of the forms, all the Eikons when you start the New Game Plus. And that's actually one of the reasonings why the developers made the game allegedly so easy, because they want you to play New Game Plus. Now, I already said that it's easy, and why it's very easy is due to the fact that there are these rings, and the rings basically give you like automatic dodges, automatic succession strikes, and all that type of stuff. They're making the gameplay easier. I played without the rings. I didn't touch them. And it still was easy, okay? I was like defeating these like bosses which were like 8 levels higher than me just through pure mechanics. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that the dodging is very like easy to do. Like unlike in Dark Souls, there's no stamina, so I can spam dodge all the time. And this way I'm just like buying time until the cooldowns are off and I can heal myself and yada yada yada. So there are just like fundamentally too many easy things built into the game. Also, by doing attacks at the right time, you are also issuing parrying. And parrying will basically cause like a slow-mo effect, which allows you to do damage to the enemy without them doing anything, and they will take extra damage as well. So when you code in to your normal attack, parrying as well, just by being offensive and not defensive, you can actually like break their guard essentially, which is not good game design in my opinion, because it makes it too easy. This idea of like, oh, you just need to go play the game again on New Game Plus on the hardest difficulty. And the thing is, I'm not really fond of that idea, because the combat, as I said, is very redundant. On the second playthrough, there are no new skills you're unlocking. Yeah, there are a couple of new items, but the items are always the same. They're just like, just base stats increase and that's it. They don't actually offer anything else. I'm just playing the same game again, and like Clive's movement in the game, like he's not able to even sprint in the game. Unless you're like if you're in town, you're not able to sprint. Not if you're in dungeon, you're not able to sprint. Only in the open world you can sprint, but you have to be like moving to a certain direction like for 5 seconds, and it automatically starts to sprint. But I want to sprint on command by playing a button. So it's not really a game that is being made for New Game Plus. It's not Hades, it's not Dead Cells, it's not Diablo. It's not very fast to play the game through because there's a lot of cutscenes, and as I already said, the enemies have so much health, especially on New Game Plus. It just takes too much time. Even if you're able to skip out all the cutscenes, it takes so incredibly long time. So I'm not absolutely at all interested in playing the game again. If you want to have difficulty, enable it at the start. Enable it at the start. I don't need to play the game in order to play the game on hard. I think this is like one of the most dumbest ideas that modern games have invented. Like back in the day, You could choose the hardest difficulty at the very start, okay? At the very start. It was simple as that. I didn't need to play the game in order to unlock it. So the gameplay and combat, it's monotone. It's not really fun outside of the combat, especially. And even though you can bunny hop inside the game, there are a lot of like these traversable cliffs which you don't allow you to jump down, which could save you like 5 minutes of time, not actually like circling around through the path down the hill and stuff. So there's a lot of these things I would have wanted them to actually like, fix on. Now let's jump into graphics, performance, and design. So graphically, the game looks great. It's really utilizing the best what PS5 has to currently offer. And there are two different modes you can choose. There's the FPS mode, and the other one I believe was called the high performance mode. I was playing through the FPS mode, and for the most part it seemed very consistent and smooth. Obviously I didn't have an FPS counter running on the top of the screen or anything, but I only noticed like maybe 3 to 4 cutscenes max where I could see like a couple of frames dropping for a couple of seconds, and that's it. From outside of that, it's really has been a smooth experience. I didn't encounter any bugs, any glitches, like nothing of sort, no crashes. It just has been working really well, and I don't even think that they were pushing out any type of like a day one patch on this. Like that's how well the game was polished from the optimization sense. Now there are a couple of things that I'm missing from the performance side. A lot of people were concerned about the motion blur stuff. Some people, can have seizures and stuff like that from them. There are a couple of other things that are missing from the settings in general. Like maybe I wanted to like have my own custom keybinds for all the buttons in the game, and it just offers you basically 3 different loadouts, and you have to basically choose one of them, which was not something I was that big of a fan of, but eventually I got used to it. And so in terms of performance and graphics, I have to almost give it like a perfect score, like it's doing its job really, really well. And I can't wait actually how it will look like when it eventually get ported into PC. And in terms of also load times, they are very short when you actually use the quick travel. It's like 4 to 5 seconds max to basically get from to one waypoint to another. And I don't even know like what the PS5 Pro can do, so even that might be doing even a better performance, who knows, because I was playing obviously on the normal PS5. Now let's talk about a bit of the world design, which I have a lot more to talk about here. So I'm not a very big fan of this Square's approach of hyper-realism. Like this is like what we need to achieve to get the normies on. Like there are people who probably believe like, oh, if you make it look like movies, normies who don't play games might get interested playing games. And I don't think that's really it, nor is it actually like a winning formula. If you look at the most popular games in the world, you got like Clash Royale, League of Legends, World of Warcraft. All of those games are extremely popular, and all of them have like a more like a cartoon style of an art style. It's not the realism that is really drawing people in. Sometimes realism is not very good medium to basically create immersion inside the game. And you can maybe attest to that a bit in actually Final Fantasy XVI. And my problem with the design of the world, and this is something I was very critical about when the first trailer dropped, because the world didn't look very Final Fantasy, and what I mean by that is something very iconic and something very artistic. So this looks like something that is being created on using free assets from Unreal Engine, outside from like these huge crystals and some huge runes that they use. Like all the towns and the cities, these could have been from Kingdom Come Deliverance or Monster Hunter games or something like that. Nothing about the design of the levels or the cities or the towns, outside from the large crystals, which were always the cities were built next to these crystals. Nothing outside from those were really iconic looking. And you don't get to even explore these cities fully. They are usually dungeons or something like that, so you don't even get to like experience them in full, which is kind of like a disappointment, but I guess they couldn't really execute it with the limitations of PS5. Aside from these crystals, you obviously have a very Square Enix style SFX, which are like something of a visually looking similar to what we had in 15, so very bright lights and stuff, and sparkles, which I liked. I don't have any problem with that, but like the world itself like looked very dead. We talked about earlier that you can't talk to the NPCs. You're not able to really climb top of this building or anything like that. They're not very interactive, so the world design is kind of boring in that sense, that everything looks like hyper realistic. It's trying to portray like some type of a magical feudal United Kingdom mixed with France and Iceland, I guess. Most of the like balloon was feeling like a bit like Scottish, terrain, and the designs were very dull, and so applies into the character designs. Like Clive and everything is like black leather, and that's it. And every other character also like a lot of black clothing, a lot of gray clothing. Same with like Sid and Jill. It's like very bland designs. Where are the orange hairs? Where are the green hairs? And the NPCs all looked like they were models for Vogue or something. Like there were no fat or ugly people in the world. This is the fucking feudal Europe, basically. That's where it's inspired from. There were shit ton of fucking ugly people with like mud on their face. There's none of that. Everybody's super beautiful somehow. I think this was really well done in Witcher, for example. There was a bunch of fat and ugly people in it, like in the world, and that's something I really appreciated. But I was not really a big fan of this world design and how it visually looked. This ultra-realism, pursuing that is just kind of cringy. It's been done a million times before, and it's just too much pandering into Western audiences, which has been leading into censorship and other nonsense from Square's part, which I don't actually like at all. I think from the start to finish, I was not really impressed with any city, town, location in the game. And oh yeah, there was the second hideout was actually something that looks actually great. That's the only iconic location or structure that is actually existing in this game. Now let's talk about the music and the audio. So the OST perhaps has like 2 different tracks I would listen outside of the game, which I consider great, but rest of it is kind of middle of the pack. I wouldn't necessarily use the word generic, but something that doesn't really leave like a very big impression on you as unique or iconic or something that like stucks into your head. But I think it did its job. But the thing is, like, when I originally played games like 15 and 13, I wasn't really in love with those soundtracks at that time. But when I replayed those games, I kind of had built it up some type of nostalgia to them. So I came to appreciate, especially 13's soundtrack, a lot more on my second or basically my third playthrough of that game. So I think there's some type of perception here when it comes to these, audios and games in general, that they will have a bit of a different, foundation on you as time goes on. So maybe in future I will like it more, but as for now, I can't say it's really in my top 6 or anything. So it's kind of like very middle of the pack. I wouldn't say it's worse. I probably would prefer listening to it versus like some of the older Final Fantasy soundtracks, but it's nothing like too special outside from those couple of really cool tracks. Now, in terms of the voice acting, I obviously play the game on English. If I'm going to be ever playing the game again, I'm obviously going to be doing it on Japanese. I haven't actually listened to any of the Japanese clips whatsoever, so I don't know what they are like, so I can't really comment on this. Despite what I'm going to be saying about the characters later on in this video, I want to say that all the voice actors really did their jobs. They delivered. There's no cringe, no weird, odd dialogue that is kind of like off volume or off key. Everything feels very natural in terms of that dialogue, which I really appreciated. And it seemed to be very British heavy cast. Maybe there was some like Scandinavians in the mix. I didn't check that up. But I want to say like the voice acting and the dialogue has been pretty good in this game. And sometimes though, this has created a bit of a distortion that when the dialogue is really good, people are considering that as like a foundation of a good story or something. And people are really impressed easily by British accents in general, and that also has something to do with it. But like fundamentally, like, yes, voice actors did a really great job. great performances and believable performances, and even some small NPCs in the game like who gives quests, they did a great job too. So I really have no negative things to say about, you know, the voice acting at all. So we're gonna be talking about the story next, so a lot of spoilerinos, and I could talk about this for maybe 3 to 4 hours, but I'm just gonna be keeping it simple and addressing the most important aspects of the story instead, kind of like the bullet points, and we can talk about it more in the comments obviously. And I'm also going to be doing a separate video where I'm going to be addressing the DLC speculation and kind of the loose ends of the story and the ending of FF16. But so, FF16 takes place in a fictional world of Wallacea, which is basically tailored from UK, France, and I guess the desert nations are kind of akin to like Morocco or Spain. Very European or very Western European. There's a lot of British accents, and it's definitely taking a lot of influence from Game of Thrones, for example, and that's probably seems something that they haven't not mentioned, but that is definitely one of the biggest influences that they have done, even though they have cited like God of War, and you can kind of see some Norse stuff which could be alluded into being Scottish or Gaelic instead, but whatever, like that's kind of like one of the foundations. And scattered throughout the 2 continents, Ash and Storm, are these magic crystals, which are known as the Mother Crystals, which provide ether, which is a big like concept of energy in the world, and the population like use these shards to basically do magic. Like they put these slaves, which are called as bearers, to, you know, make the crystals manifest like water from a well, or use a wind to blow on like sheets that are drying on, you know, on the outside or something like that. They use these crystals for different types of things, but if you overuse them, you actually petrify and you die. And so there's a bit of a like in the beginning this sort of a portrayal of class struggle, depictions of slavery and class warfare, but in a very poor way. Okay, it's not like very deep, it's not like it's like clearly these guys have not read like Communist Manifesto or anything about class struggle in general. Class struggle in Japan is very different from what it is in the West, for example, and I don't think the writers really understood this, and they didn't really pay that much like adherence to like learning about it, in my opinion. Or it's not a big focus. It maybe takes a bit of a focus on the first quarter of the game, and then it gradually loses meaning as the like the real villain, so to speak, is being revealed. So this is like a side plot of sorts in the world. And obviously the crystals play a huge part because the characters want to destroy them. In the previous games, they usually tried to protect the crystals. So this is like an antithetical Final Fantasy. It's like the reverse of Final Fantasy, which is very ironic in my opinion, because what we discussed about earlier, like, you know, kind of moving a lot away from its roots right now. It's not being barely an RPG game, and here you have this sort of a like, we're destroying what we have built before. And it's like, okay, it's maybe subversion. Some people like subversion. I'm really anti-subversion in general, but you know, if this doesn't become a habit, I guess I'm okay with this idea and this concept. But it's not like very interesting, super interesting setting, because the world, as I said, is very grounded in reality, and it's not like super magical. Yes, there's magic in this. There's icons, which are like these dominants are people who can basically transform into Eikons. And it's kind of like a super form of sorts. I mean, there's been many anime like this, and I think it's a good concept actually. Instead of like being the summoners, I still like the FF10 summoner aspect about it. It's a bit more lore heavy and more interesting dynamic, but this is also good, and I wouldn't mind to see it again, of people transforming into Eikons, or limit breaks being transformations. Something that I don't remember what was the game from the person or developers on PS2, but something like that could be explored, or like Dragoon system from Legend of Dragoon. That's fine. So I kind of like that. And the dominants are kind of like almost each nation has like 1 or 2, and they use these on the war with each other. Here's the one of the big first problems of this game. Like, people are sending these massive armies into these battlefields, and then they send the Eikons in, which like one shot and kill like 100 men with one punch or something, which is like totally nonsensical. Like, why would you send so much military in the field if they're gonna be killed instantly by the fucking Eikons? Like, it's so like much of a waste. Strategy wise, it does not make any sense whatsoever. And if we compare it to like Attack on Titan or some other kaiju style anime or movies, usually people have created some type of like anti-Eikon weapons or something like that. And like there's anti-Titan weapons in Attack on Titan. So none of these Eikons have been around for thousands of years. And no, you don't have any abilities or weaponry which are like meant to fight against the Eikons. Like even in Final Fantasy X, they were building out, the Albed were building out all of these weapons to basically combat Sin. Like there was a logic behind of like these people, Mihen Road or whatever it's called, when they were fighting Sin the first time, like there was like a logic that they could win, like some type of root science. But this idea that the people are just going into randomly into this battlefield just to get killed by the Eikon, like romping around, is like absolute nonsense to me. Like this is like so dumb in so many levels. Like it doesn't make any sense. Now, but let's move on. So, the core of the nations in the Valisthea is the Grand Duchy of Rosaria, and that's basically where Clive and Joshua are from, they're our main protagonists. And then we have the Holy Empire of Semberk, which is kind of like the France of the world, the Dalmatian Republic, which is kind of like the Morocco, Spain, the Storm Continent, which is the Kingdom of Wallade, which is, I think it's very Scottish. I always can mix these up, but it's not, it's either Scottish or Irish, either one of those two. And it's at least the terrain and archipelago is very, very Scottish or Irish. And the fundamental thing here is that, and then there's the Iron Kingdom, which are like some Orthodox things. They are in very weird, low part to play in the whole story, and they don't really matter that much. Maybe they get explored in DLC. That's one of my speculations. Basically, that's like a Game of Thrones world map from the start. So let's look at some of the games in the recent past, like Runerzia, Tales of Arise, Fire Emblem, and Elden Ring. All of these 4 games use the same Game of Thrones story model, multiple nations, which get defeated one by one. So Tales of Arise and Fire Emblem, for example, they go in a chronological order. They first go into this kingdom, then that kingdom. But once the kingdoms are gone through or the zone is through, they don't actually address them anymore again. So they are like, the arc is over. And the same thing is kind of used in 16, but in a bit more better way. The 16 doesn't like totally forget the region after the heroes have done their fighting against the nation itself, okay? So what I mean by that is when you are doing this Game of Thrones format, you can't actually have this traditional story setting because you have to portray it from multiple lenses. That's what Game of Thrones is about. It's not 90% screen time on Jon Snow until the end. You are following the Lannisters, you are following these people, you're following that people, and that's like you're viewing the story from multiple perspectives. And that's the failure what FF16 does, is that in order for this story to be interesting, you have to like portray it. And yes, you get some cutscenes like what is happening at the same time in this place or that place, but the story has to be like natural in the sense that there's a lot of things happening at the same time at many places. And that's why what Final Fantasy IX did really well was that you were changing party from following Zidane to following Garnet. So you were bouncing around, seeing the perspective of the different group at the same time. So in the same vein, we should have been following Joshua at times at the other side of the world when Clive was in this part of the world, okay? And yeah, I keep mentioning Joshua. Yes, he fucking doesn't die. That was like super evident at the trailers. Like anybody who didn't figure out that Joshua wasn't dead, you're probably very young or you haven't watched many of these stories, but like it was very clear that Joshua didn't die, given to the fact that there's this shadowy figure which just happens to be looking like a teenager Joshua all together. So this was like, okay, so Joshua could have been a playable character and you could have like seen his, and maybe it's a DLC, who knows, we could have played as Joshua in a different part of the world at different time when Clive and others were doing something. But this is like not how you tell these multi-nation stories like Game of Thrones. People don't know how exactly to adapt it in game. It's a lot harder because you have to choose protagonists and you can't just be playing as the villains next. And well, you can actually. It's been done before, but this is not the way to tell this story. 16 did a lot better than Tales of Arise. Fire Emblem did, but fundamentally, this is like a very detailed way to tell a story. It can only work in this sort of a Game of Thrones multi-nation style thing. Now, and then obviously midway, you get a revelation that it's maybe not the other kingdoms who are the bad enemies, and then they reveal the main villain, which is the Ultima. And the Ultima is very, well, with weird fish eyes, and it's like, he's a god apparently, or a demigod. I don't really like this. There's a lot of concepts about free will and rebelling against the gods. I don't like this fact because when you are portraying gods, it's very important to portray them in a very different context, because in Abrahamic religions, the gods are omnipotent. In the pantheons, where there's multiple gods, they're never like omnipotent. They have like some realm that they are controlling, like in Greek mythology with Zeus, Hades, etc. Like there's different roles that they have, but they're not like super omnipotent. They're fighting against each other as gods. That's more interesting and like more realistic in my sense. And in here, the Ultima is like the ultimate god, but it's like, if you can create humans, why can't you just snap your fingers and, you know, erase them all? So the weird thing, the god is struggling against, fight against the humanity, is just so silly to me. And this was like one of the most kind of like a low point villains. He gets a bit more redeemed towards the end, like it gets a bit more interesting, I guess. And yeah, I wasn't like super impressed by the visual design, or like the idea behind Ultima. It seemed kind of lame. And this also like Odin serving him, and you have to fight Odin, and Odin also knows that he cannot kill Clive, he has to die to him. Also a very dumbass idea, because it makes the fight meaningless in terms of story-wise, because you know that what can possibly happen in that fight. So it's like, this is dumbass, okay? And now let's get into the characters. So as I said, characters, voice actors are really good, and I don't want to like levy criticism on them. They didn't write the story, okay? They didn't write the dialogue. That's on the developers. Going in, I think the game starts out as a really good, and the ending is pretty nice then, but everything on the middle is very mediocre at best. And I think storytelling in games has been in a slope for a very long time. They have been extremely generic and not very complex or depth, and it seems that all the writers that were good are in a slump. They're just really not able to produce good stories anymore. It's just like, it's been horrible. Star Ocean was horrible, Tales of Arise was horrible, Engage was pretty horrible storytelling. Like, it's just like over and over again. I just like have almost no expectations for these stories anymore. And I'm gonna explain to you why. So, first of all, it was too obvious that Joshua is alive. And that's the biggest twist in the whole game. That's the biggest twist, that Joshua is alive. And after that, like, nothing of shocking nature happens. Everything is very streamlined. Ultima is not holding some aces in his hands. Like, it's very streamlined what's going to happen and who's going to be next, which crystal are we going to be destroying next. Like, everything is like, you kind of know how this story is going to end from the very beginning. Well, once they get into first revelation. Now, also the problem is that the best characters in the game are Cid and Benedicta, which both of them are killed in the game very early on. And it's sad, because you basically killed the most interesting characters in the goddamn game so early on. Because Benedicta is the first character that dies. And why do you exactly, people asking, why do you think Benedicta is the best character? And the thing is, Benedicta is a character that's very connected into Odin. He's very connected to Titan, and he's also connected to Cid. So it's a lot of connections, a lot of past with a lot of the other characters, and also a character that actually shows, well, the performances are really good, but it's like actually has these sort of different sides to her. There's like the sexual side, then there's this sort of a sarcastic, nihilistic, cold side to her, and then there's the like ragey side to her, like she going like full feminist schizo, I don't mean that in a literal way, being a feminist, but like I'm just meaning that there's a lot of sides to her. She's like very complex in that way, in terms of a range of emotions that she is displaying. So there's like she's not one-dimensional. That's what I'm trying to say here. She's the most dimensional character in the story. And it's very sad that she dies early on. There's a couple of flashbacks where she appears, but like fundamentally, this is the best character in the game. Then comes Cid, who's also killed off kind of early on. And this, by the way, this voice actor was also voicing Lorath in Diablo 4, which I just reviewed, by the way. Check that review out. So this was also a very good character. He had a lot of heart. He had a bit of a sarcasm. He was a bit monotone, I admit, but it's probably the character that most people like. He is very akin to Balthier from Final Fantasy XII, because it was interesting, like in FF12, Vaughn is definitely like the worst character, but Balthier is like everybody's favorite character in FF12, and I think there's gonna be. I haven't read like what other people think, but I think people believe that Sid is the best character in the game. Like, he has a bit of a charm, great voice actor. His design is a bit bland or whatever. He is like the most character with a lot of heart, and you're gonna be seeing him in flashbacks, and he's kind of like has a bit of a legacy, has a big impact on the story as well, and the consciousness of a lot of the characters. And Clive is okay, and so is Joshua. I liked Joshua more as a kid. He was more interesting as a kid. Once he was a teenager, I wasn't really that fan of his design. Nothing wrong with it. I just liked him the way he looked as a kid. Non-pedo, okay? And also, like, he just was, I don't know, what the kid version was more innocent, I guess. It was bringing more dynamic into it, and maybe I liked the voice actor of the kid more. So I really liked that, but I didn't really care for the sibling relationship of Joshua and Clive. Honestly, was not able to connect. Sometimes, even on bad games, I might get teary-eyed. I didn't cry one time in 16, so that's a bad thing. Yeah, I just didn't really... Clive is very mediocre main character. He's not very multi-dimensional. He looks okay, I guess, in terms of visual design. He looks like a very old Noct, basically. He actually almost a carbon copy of Noct from FF15, in my opinion. That was one of my concerns, that he looked way too much like him and also way too generic at the same time. In my opinion, then we obviously have Uncle. He was actually kind of funny, and he is probably the most comedic filter of this game, and one of them, and then I would have to say, is like the third best character. And then we have the female lead of this game, Jill, who happens to have the same level of attraction as an old Soviet carpet found from a dumpster. I mean, God, this character is so boring. She's dull, she's depressing. The design is also like average at best, and her backstory, which is explored in a story mission, I couldn't give a two fucks about that. Go back to kitchen, make me a sandwich, and then suck my cock, Jill. You are boring. You're so boring. God damn it. Like, I mean, even characters like Ash, Lightning, and Sarah look like goddesses compared to Jill. Like, this character is so goddamn dull and uninteresting. I wish they would have killed her instead of Sid. Like, holy fuck. This character was so fucking filler. And the worst part is, we might see her as the DLC character. Like, that's sadly the case here. But Jill is, like, so boring. And then we have Prince Dion, who happens to be a homosexual. And I don't like this idea of, like, pandering to the LGBT audience, because the fact of the matter is, when you do that, you might get banned from the Chinese market, you might get banned from the Arabic markets, you already got banned on Saudi Arabia, and that's going to be affecting your sales, and less sales means less Final Fantasy games for us. So we don't want that, because not adding an LGBT characters is not going to get your game banned anywhere. So that's like basic business 101 here, to be honest. And secondly, like, this idea that a royalty would be homosexual, to me, is frankly insulting as an European. To even suggest or allude the idea that some of the current royalties in Europe would be homosexuals is frankly insulting. It's just fundamentally wrong thing to do. And the Game of Thrones has done it also as well. Like, it's okay to maybe have some random gay guy somewhere in the story, but as a prince, as a form of loyalty, and then Prince Dion gets super triggered when his father says, I'm gonna announce your baby brother as the king, because if you're homosexual, you're not going to have kids probably, so you're not fit to be the king in the first place, and then gets triggered from that, which doesn't make any sense, which also kind of makes me think, was that gay relationship written afterwards? Did they edit those kissing scenes after? Like, is it actually like something that they were initially planning for him? Because it doesn't seem supernatural in a lot of ways to allude. I mean, he has a kind of like a very gay face, like he could like buy into that would have like very feminine look, that could be a homosexual. But fundamentally, was it added in afterwards? I don't know, and we probably never will know. I mean, yeah, you can have a gay character too, but major character and as a prince, that's insulting. That's just insulting. That's just wrong in so many levels. Now, that's what I have to say about the characters. There were some other like small minor characters. I already talked about that the NPCs looked way too pretty, like they're in the Vogue magazine or something. That was a problem. There's no ugly people in this game whatsoever. No fat people, except one, the guy who wants to be Hodor, basically, who happens to be kind of funny character, but to me, I don't fundamentally find him like super important, but a good character nonetheless. So the cast is okay, but they killed the best ones at the first, and I just didn't really build out that relationship interest for Clive and Joshua. They just were kind of dull and boring and one-dimensional altogether. And in terms of the ending, it's interesting, but at the same time, I'm getting a bit tired of this idea of like killing all the main characters. Everybody's gonna love that, right? I mean, I understand the level of sacrifice you would do for the world or for your brother, but Joshua already made the sacrifice in the ending, and doesn't there need to be another? So that's kind of weird, but it's very open-ended. We don't exactly know. Did either of them die? Did Clive resurrect Joshua? Or who wrote the book in the end, the after credits scene? Who wrote the book? Was it Joshua or Clive? When did they write that book? Before they went to fight Ultima? So that's kind of a lot of like open questions, which we're going to be addressing in the DLC video. But I don't think it's actually the worst of the endings. I think it's a very faithful to the kind of the overall message of the story, which is kind of shallow in a lot of ways. I think it could have been a lot more complex, a lot of talking about class struggle more and stuff like this. The villains I was not a big fan of. I think this has been a worldwide phenomenon where villains have been written very poorly, especially in Disney. And I just don't know how I feel about the game as a whole, and I can't really give you a very concrete ranking here, guys. I mean, it's like 8 out of 10 maybe, 7.5, and just like add like people talking about what if it was turn-based. I don't think that would have fixed the game in itself. Like, yes, there could have been different design choices if they done that, but it's not about the turn-based or the combat that made me, you know, feel off about it. It was the lack of the RPG elements, and I didn't like this ultra-realistic, you know, world. It's not interesting to me, or the lore was not very interesting to me. The lore was better than it was in 13 for sure, and about 15 had some interesting things going for it, like design-wise, that were kind of unique, which I now retrospect appreciate. And I wasn't really that big a fan of this Ifrit design, by the way. A lot of people seem to love it, but I don't. I thought that Bahamut design was also kind of lackluster, but I liked Phoenix. Shiva I didn't like. She always looked so amazing on other ones. Odin was badass. Odin was really cool, and Titan was cool too. And Garuda actually really cool too. So I was very mixed with that. So, yeah, I don't really have much else to add here. But thanks for watching, guys. I'm not going to be blabbing longer. This is like 1 hour already. And subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more content, obviously.